I never expected her to change my life with just one sentence, but when she looked at me, her voice trembling, and whispered, "I've waited too long to pretend anymore," I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I remember the first time I truly noticed her. Not just in passing, not just as another familiar face among the rhythms of my daily life, but in the kind of way that leaves an imprint you can't easily shake. She wasn't the type of woman who demanded attention the moment she entered a room. No, her presence was quieter, steadier, like a soft melody you don't immediately recognize but find yourself humming hours later. She carried herself with grace, as if she knew exactly who she was, and yet there was something in her eyes, something that felt like a story waiting to be told. That day, the sun was dipping low, painting everything in amber. I had been helping a colleague carry some books when she appeared at the doorway, thanking us with that warm, careful smile of hers. Her voice was calm, almost soothing, with a richness that caught me off guard. It wasn't just the sound, it was the way she spoke, as if each word carried weight, as if she wanted you to feel heard when she spoke to you. I caught myself watching her more closely than I should have. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The faint trace of perfume she left when she walked past. Floral, but not sweet, grounded with something deeper, something that lingered. Even the way she held herself, straight-backed, graceful, yet with a softness that betrayed a kind of quiet vulnerability. When our eyes met, it was nothing more than a polite glance. But in that brief second, I felt a pull. Not the kind that sweeps you away suddenly, but the kind that sits in your chest, steady and insistent, like a question you can't yet answer. She smiled, and though it was genuine, I noticed it didn't quite reach her eyes. It was as if she'd mastered the art of appearing perfectly composed while hiding something only she knew. Later, when we exchanged a few words, I realized how different she was from anyone I'd known. There was no rush in her tone, no need to fill silence with empty chatter. She listened in a way that made me feel like my words mattered. And yet, behind her calm exterior, there was a flicker, like a candle in the wind, of something unsaid. That evening, as I walked home, I kept thinking about her. Not in the way you think about someone you're simply attracted to, but in the way you think about a puzzle that won't leave your mind. Why did her smile feel heavy, as though she was carrying something unseen? Why did her presence linger with me, like the aftertaste of a strong wine, long after she had left? I didn't know it then, but that first impression, subtle, fleeting, was the beginning of something I couldn't have prepared for. A story that would unfold slowly, drawing me in deeper with every glance, every word, every quiet moment we shared. The days that followed only deepened the impression she had left on me. It wasn't dramatic, not the kind of love at first sight people write songs about. No, it was something quieter, something that crept in slowly and steadily, like the way sunlight fills a room without you realizing when it first began. Our encounters became more frequent, though always ordinary on the surface. Passing each other in the hall, sharing a table in the cafeteria when there weren't enough seats, standing side by side while waiting for coffee. Nothing remarkable, nothing anyone else would have noticed. But to me, those moments grew heavier with meaning each time. I began to notice things I hadn't before. The way her laugh carried warmth but came sparingly, as though she only allowed herself joy in measured doses. The way she tilted her head slightly when listening, giving her full attention as though she had nowhere else to be. I noticed how she seemed to search for me in a room, never openly, never long enough for others to catch, but enough that I felt it. And maybe I imagined it, but when her eyes found mine, there was a softness there that lingered a little too long. One afternoon, I offered to bring her coffee. She smiled, accepting with a polite thank you. When I handed her the cup, her fingers brushed against mine. Just the briefest touch, unintentional perhaps, but it set something inside me alight. That single touch stayed with me all day. It was ridiculous, I told myself. Just skin against skin, a second, no more. Yet the warmth of it lingered as though she had left a piece of herself with me. And then there were the silences. I've never been good with silence. I used to fill it quickly, afraid of what it might reveal. But with her, it was full, charged. We could sit across from each other, neither speaking, and somehow the air felt alive, like something unspoken hung between us, waiting. It was in those pauses that I felt closest to her, as if words would only get in the way of what our eyes were already saying. A quiet awareness grew, an awareness that we were treading a delicate line, one neither of us dared to name. Sometimes, when she laughed at something I said, her hand would find my arm briefly, as though steadying herself. Just a light touch. And every time, it felt deliberate, even if it wasn't. I would catch her glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. And when our eyes did meet, there was always that fraction of a second where neither of us looked away, until we both remembered ourselves and broke the moment with a polite smile. It was all so subtle, so easily dismissed by anyone else. But to me, every glance, every brush of her hand, every shared silence felt like a step closer to something neither of us dared name. A quiet, growing awareness. And though I couldn't admit it then, I knew, somewhere deep inside, that we were no longer just two people crossing paths by chance. Something was unfolding, quietly, carefully, like a secret neither of us had yet found the courage to speak aloud. By then, I could no longer deny it. Something inside me shifted whenever she was near. It wasn't just admiration or the passing attraction a young man might feel for someone beautiful. It was deeper, heavier, more complex. A pull that both excited and unsettled me. But with that pull came hesitation. There were nights I lay awake, replaying every glance, every brush of her hand against mine, every laugh that seemed meant only for me. And then came the doubts, the reminders I whispered to myself in the dark. She's older. She's lived a life before you. What would people say if they knew? I couldn't escape the questions. Was I misreading the signs? Was I imagining the warmth in her eyes? Was she simply being kind, gracious, the way she always was, and I, foolishly, was searching for more in it than was really there? But then there were moments that unraveled my careful logic. Like the evening we found ourselves alone in the office after everyone else had gone. I was packing my bag when she walked in, gathering her things. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet where every small sound feels magnified. The rustle of paper, the click of her pen, the faint rhythm of her breathing. We spoke about nothing important, just the weather, a project, the kind of talk meant to pass time. But in the middle of it, she laughed at something I said, and as her laughter faded, her hand rested lightly on my arm, steadying herself as if she'd leaned too close to the edge of something. It lasted no more than a second, but my whole body remembered it. After she left, I sat there staring at the empty chair across from me, heart pounding as though I'd just run a mile. What was I doing? Why was I letting myself feel this way? The hesitation grew heavier each time. I began pulling back in small ways, shortening our conversations, forcing myself not to look for her in a crowded room. And yet, she noticed. One afternoon, when I avoided sitting too close, her smile faltered for the briefest moment before she covered it with her usual poise. That look haunted me. It was as though she knew, as though she could feel me retreating, and it hurt her more than she wanted me to see. But I couldn't help it. My heart wanted her, but my mind was terrified. Terrified of crossing a line, terrified of what people might say, terrified of what this meant. And most of all, terrified of how deeply I was already falling without even realizing when it began. So I hesitated. I lingered in the in-between, close enough to feel the pull, but too afraid to reach for it. What I didn't realize then was that hesitation has its own language. And sometimes, the pauses we think are protecting us are the very moments that speak the loudest. It happened on one of those evenings that feel almost designed to draw two people closer. The rain had begun softly, the kind that doesn't rush but lingers, gentle, steady, soaking the streets in a silver sheen. I hadn't expected to see her, but there she was, standing just outside the doorway of the building, umbrella in hand, watching the rain as though she were deciding whether to step into it or wait it out. When she turned and saw me, her smile was quiet, unforced. "You're still here?" she asked. I shrugged, adjusting the strap on my bag. Guess I was waiting for the rain to ease up. She tilted her head, considering, then lifted her umbrella ever so slightly. "We can share if you don't mind." I don't think she realized how much those words did to me. We can share. Such simple words, but they carried a weight that pressed against my chest. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course." And so we walked, shoulder to shoulder, both of us beneath the small shelter of her umbrella. The closeness was unavoidable. Her arm brushed against mine with every step, and though the air around us was cool and damp, I felt a warmth spreading through me I couldn't shake. The rain tapped gently on the fabric above us, creating a rhythm that seemed to muffle the rest of the world. It was just us, her perfume, faint but grounding, the sound of her breath, the way her hair, damp at the ends, clung softly against her cheek. We spoke at first about little things, work, errands, how quickly the season was changing. But as the streets grew emptier and the silence between us deepened, our words drifted into softer territory. She told me about the books she used to love as a girl, how she still reread them when she felt restless. I told her about nights when I couldn't sleep, and how I'd wander the streets just to feel the night air. She listened, not just politely, but intently, as though she was storing every word somewhere safe. And then there was a pause, not the kind that needed to be filled, but the kind that held its own weight. We kept walking, her shoulder pressing gently into mine with each step. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. At one point, she reached up to adjust the umbrella, and her hand brushed against mine, fingers grazing so lightly it might have been an accident. But it didn't feel like one. The warmth of it lingered far longer than the touch itself. When we reached her street, she stopped, lowering the umbrella slightly. The rain softened around us, and for a moment, it felt as though the world had paused just for us. She looked at me, really looked, and in her eyes I saw something I hadn't dared to name. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't even an invitation. It was simply a closeness, a quiet intimacy that didn't need words to exist. And in that moment, standing there with rain dripping from the edges of her umbrella, I realized how dangerous silence could be. Because sometimes silence said everything. It was late one evening when the first real crack appeared in the walls she kept so carefully around herself. We had lingered longer than usual, sitting in the quiet corner of a small cafe. Most of the tables had emptied, the hum of conversation fading until only the soft clink of cups and the low hiss of the coffee machine filled the air. She sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a half-finished cup, staring into it as though searching for answers at the bottom. I had just told her some trivial story from my day, something meant to keep the moment light, but she hadn't laughed this time. Instead, her smile wavered, then disappeared altogether. "I don't usually talk about this," she said suddenly, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I leaned forward slightly, sensing the shift. "You don't have to," I replied softly. Her eyes lifted to meet mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in them. Not the kind of fear that comes from danger, but the kind born of opening yourself after too long of staying closed. She hesitated, fingers tracing the rim of her cup, before finally letting the words escape. "Sometimes," she said, pausing, swallowing, "I feel invisible. People see what they expect to see. Confident, put together, someone who never needs anyone. But it's not always true." The weight of her admission hung between us, heavier than any silence we'd shared before. I didn't speak right away. I just watched her, letting her know without words that I was listening, that she was safe. Her voice trembled slightly as she continued. "I've spent so many years being the strong one, the reliable one. And yet, sometimes when the day ends, I come home and realize how quiet it really is. How long it's been since someone truly looked at me and saw me." My chest tightened. There was something so raw in the way she said it, like each word cost her more than she wanted to admit. For a moment, she looked away, almost ashamed of revealing herself so openly. Without thinking, I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Her skin was cool from the cup she had been holding, but I felt the faint tremor beneath it. She didn't pull away. In fact, her fingers tightened slightly around mine, as if holding on to the anchor she had been too afraid to ask for. She let out a small breath, one that sounded almost like relief. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," she whispered. I smiled gently, though my heart ached for her. Maybe because I was meant to hear it. Her lips parted as though she might respond, but instead she just sat there, her hand still in mine, her eyes glistening faintly in the dim light. In that moment, the carefully constructed image she showed the world slipped, and I caught a glimpse of the woman beneath, the one who longed to be seen, to be understood. And it struck me then, this wasn't just attraction. This was trust. And trust, once given, changes everything. The night was still, painted with the kind of silence that makes every word, every breath, carry more weight. We had lingered on her porch after dinner, unwilling to let the evening end, though neither of us said it aloud. A faint breeze stirred the leaves above us, carrying the scent of jasmine from the garden. I could see the light from her living room spilling softly across the steps, warming the edges of the night, as if inviting us to stay suspended in this moment. She sat close beside me, her shawl drawn loosely around her shoulders. The glow of the porch lantern touched her face in golden highlights, and in that light, she looked both strong and impossibly vulnerable. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers interlaced, but every now and then they shifted, like she was holding back from reaching for me. I spoke first because the weight of silence was pressing against my chest. I don't know why, but when I'm with you, time feels different, slower, like the world can wait. Her lips parted slightly, the faintest smile tugging at them, but her eyes searched mine with intensity. She leaned back, drawing in a long breath, as though she had been carrying something for too long. Then, in a voice both steady and trembling, she said the words that would change everything. "I've waited too long to pretend anymore." The air around us seemed to still, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Her voice wasn't dramatic, wasn't loud. It was quiet, but filled with the kind of truth that cut straight through every layer of doubt. "What do you mean?" I whispered, though deep down I already knew. She turned to face me fully, her hand finally lifting, hesitant at first, until her fingers brushed mine. That single touch carried the weight of all the unspoken feelings between us, a current that raced through me. "I mean," she continued softly, her eyes never leaving mine, "that I can't keep pretending what I feel isn't real. I've told myself it's wrong, that it's complicated, that the world wouldn't understand. But every time I look at you, every time you make me laugh, or just sit here with me in the quiet, I feel it, and I don't want to hide it anymore." Her words left me stunned, my chest both heavy and light at once. For so long, I had carried my own unspoken feelings, carefully tucked away behind respect and hesitation. Hearing her confess them so openly felt like a dam breaking. I reached for her hand, not rushed but deliberate. Our fingers interlocked, fitting together like they had always been meant to. Her hand was warm, trembling slightly, and I held it tighter, not to claim, but to reassure. "I feel it too," I said finally, my voice low but certain. "I've been afraid to admit it, afraid of what it might mean. But I don't want to pretend either." Her shoulders dropped, as if the weight she'd been carrying had finally slipped away. She let out a shaky laugh, her eyes glistening with something between relief and hope. And then, without words, she leaned gently against me. Her head found its place on my shoulder, her hair brushing softly against my jaw. I closed my eyes, breathing in the faint scent of her perfume, feeling the warmth of her body pressed lightly against mine. For the first time, nothing stood between us. No pretending, no hesitation, just the truth, finally spoken, hanging in the night air like a promise. The night deepened around us, quiet except for the occasional hum of crickets and the whisper of leaves in the breeze. She still leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder, and I could feel the steady rhythm of her breath. That closeness, simple and unforced, was more powerful than any kiss or grand gesture. It was the kind of closeness that told me this was real, and neither of us would have to carry the silence anymore. After a while, she lifted her head, her eyes shining in the dim porch light. "Do you realize what we've done?" she asked, her voice a fragile blend of relief and worry. I nodded, smiling softly. "We've told the truth." She let out a breath, almost a laugh, but her hand tightened around mine as if she wasn't ready to let go. "The truth feels terrifying but freeing. Like I've been holding my breath for years and finally let it out." I watched her carefully, the way her lips trembled slightly even as she smiled, the way her shoulders seemed lighter than they had all evening. I reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek, letting my fingers linger a second longer than necessary. "You don't have to pretend anymore," I whispered. "Not with me." Her eyes closed briefly at the touch, and when they opened again, there was no hesitation, only warmth, only clarity. She leaned in, slowly, deliberately, and rested her forehead against mine. That quiet gesture carried more meaning than 1,000 words. It was trust. It was surrender. It was the unspoken promise that whatever came next, we'd face it together. "I was so afraid," she admitted, her voice low and raw. "Afraid you'd think I was foolish. Afraid you'd walk away. Afraid of wanting this as much as I do." I held her hand tighter, grounding her. "I'm not walking away. I don't think you're foolish. If anything, you're braver than me. You spoke the words I couldn't." She laughed then, a soft, genuine laugh that filled the night air with warmth. Her thumb brushed across my hand, slow and gentle, like she was memorizing the shape of it. And in that moment, everything felt settled. Not perfect, not without questions, but settled in the way a heart finally rests when it's found a place to belong. We sat there a while longer, not rushing, not planning, just being. The silence was no longer heavy, but comforting, like a blanket we wrapped ourselves in. When she eventually leaned back against me again, her cheek against my chest, I felt the steady rhythm of her heartbeat aligning with mine. The world might not understand, and maybe tomorrow would bring its shared challenges. But in that quiet night, on that small porch, none of it mattered. What mattered was that we had spoken the truth, and in doing so, we had chosen each other. Her final words before the night ended stayed with me, soft and certain. Whatever happens next, at least it's real. And I knew then, with absolute certainty, that neither of us would ever go back to pretending.